I'm 95 years old, and 3 months ago I discovered something about my wife that made me question the last 40 years of my life. It started with a locked briefcase in my basement. Inside were dozens of letters written to my wife by a man I trusted like a brother. A man who sat at my dinner table. A man who held my children when they were babies. My best friend. But one sentence in those letters suggested something I never imagined. Something that still keeps me awake at night. It said my son might not actually be my son. So, before I continue, let me ask you something. If you discovered this at 95, would you want to know the truth? It started with something ordinary, cleaning the basement. When you hit 95, you begin thinking about the things you'll leave behind. The boxes, the old furniture, the photographs your children will someday sort through after you're gone. I wasn't looking for anything special that day, just organizing, moving things around, trying to make the place a little less cluttered. The basement had been the same for decades. Dusty shelves, old tools hanging from nails in the wall, Christmas decorations packed into faded cardboard boxes, things my wife Helen and I had collected over an entire lifetime. Helen had been gone for 12 years by then. The house still felt full of her presence. Sometimes I would find her handwriting on old recipe cards. Sometimes I would open a closet and smell her perfume on an old coat. Memories have a way of hiding in quiet corners. That afternoon, I was moving an old trunk when I noticed something behind it. A small black briefcase. The leather looked worn and dry with age. I didn't recognize it, which struck me as strange. After 40 years in the same house, you usually remember every object you own. But this one felt unfamiliar. I pulled it out from the corner and wiped the dust off the surface. The metal clasp had a small lock. Inside the briefcase were dozens of envelopes, neatly stacked, all tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper looked old, yellowed with time. The kind of letters people wrote before phones became the center of communication. Each envelope had the same name written across the front, Helen, my wife. But something immediately felt wrong. None of them were addressed to our home. They were addressed simply to her name, as if someone had handed them to her directly, or mailed them somewhere else first. I untied the ribbon carefully. The letter was dated 1978. I remember that year well. Our youngest daughter had just started school. Helen and I had been married for 12 years. Life felt stable then, peaceful. The letter began with 4 words. My dearest Helen. I paused. At first, I thought it might be something old, maybe from before we were married. But the next sentence made my stomach tighten. Yesterday wasn't enough. I already miss you. I turned the page slowly. The letter described a lunch they'd shared the previous afternoon. a quiet place outside town, a moment they didn't want to end. Then I reached the signature at the bottom. The name written there made my hands start to shake. Robert. Robert wasn't a stranger. He was my best friend. We met when we were both 23. Two young men trying to build careers and families. We worked in the same company for nearly 15 years. He stood beside me at my wedding. I stood beside him at his. Our children played together when they were young. Robert was the kind of friend you trust without hesitation. He helped me move into this house. He joined our family for holidays. He sat at our dinner table hundreds of times. Sometimes we would spend hours talking in the backyard while Helen prepared food inside. He was practically family. That's why reading his name at the bottom of that letter felt impossible. I opened another envelope, then another. Each one told a similar story. Secret meetings. Afternoons when Helen said she was visiting relatives. Weekends when she claimed she was shopping in the city. But according to those letters, she had been spending time with Robert. Not once, not twice, but over and over again, for years. The dates stretched across the late 70s, then the early 80s, then even later. I sat down on the basement floor as the realization slowly sank in. The letters described a relationship that had lasted nearly a decade. Not a moment of weakness, not a brief mistake. A full relationship hidden inside the life we shared. But the discoveries weren't finished yet. Between two envelopes, I noticed something folded carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was a bank receipt. Then another. Then another. All dated over a long span of time. Transfers, large amounts of money, thousands of dollars, all sent to the same account, Robert's account. I felt my chest tighten as I read the numbers. The money came from our joint savings, money Helen and I had set aside for retirement, money we believed was protecting our future. But according to those documents, Helen had been sending it to Robert quietly for 25 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, enough to add up to a significant sum. My hands were shaking when I reached the final envelope in the briefcase. It looked different from the others, shorter, more rushed. The date was late, near the end of their correspondence. I opened it slowly. The letter contained only a few sentences, but one line changed everything. Sometimes I look at Kevin and wonder if he knows. Kevin, my oldest son. He has your eyes, but my stubbornness. I read that sentence again and again and again. For 95 years, I believed Kevin was my son. I taught him to ride a bicycle. I watched him graduate. I stood proudly beside him at his wedding. And suddenly, one sentence written decades ago made me question everything. Helen passed away 12 years ago. Robert died 5 years after that. Both of them took their explanations with them, leaving behind nothing but letters and questions. Kevin is 63 now. He has children of his own, grandchildren who run through my living room every Christmas. Every Sunday afternoon he calls me. He asks how I'm feeling, if I've eaten enough, if I need help with anything around the house. He still calls me Dad, and every time I hear his voice, I ask myself the same question. Does blood truly define a father, or do decades of love mean more? I've looked at those letters many times since that day in the basement. Sometimes I convince myself they don't matter. Sometimes I convince myself they mean everything. But one thing remains certain. Kevin has been my son for 63 years, not because of biology, but because of every moment we've shared, every conversation, every lesson, every memory. And maybe that's what truly matters. So, now I want to ask you something honestly. If you were 95 years old and discovered your entire marriage might have been built on secrets, would you tell your children the truth? Or would you protect the life you built together and let the past stay buried? Tell me in the comments, because after everything I've learned, I still don't know what the right answer is.